What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode and another edition of the Met Central podcast here on Met Central. This is podcast episode number 93, where unfortunately, because this is not going to be a good one, guys, it's just not. There's a lot of bad shit happening with this team. But listen, even though vibes are probably at an all-time low right now, we're still here. We still got to do these podcasts, and we still got to, get you guys some content here on Met Central. So yeah, like I said, everybody, welcome back. In case you guys are wondering, yes, it is just me today on this episode. Evan could not make it. Unfortunately, he was not feeling well. He was sick. So here I am by myself talking about probably what is the worst series this team has played this year, which is it's shocking, but yet not shocking to it's shocking, but not shocking to say at the same time, because there was a couple times and a couple really bad stretches where this team has played. If you guys, think about this through the mid end of July, where they got swept by the Rays, they got swept by the Braves in Atlanta, and then you look at the end of August, where again they got swept in multiple series and lost multiple series, and I believe at one point lost 14 out of 15 games, some crazy stat like that. But listen, I think for me, comfortably, you can call this series against the Nationals the worst series of the season. And there's multiple reasons why. First of all, I think we can all agree that the Nationals are not a good team. They are simply not. Are they a young, up and coming, feisty team? Yes, they have a lot of good young players coming up to their system. You look at James Wood, even though he's severely struggled through the second half. You look at a guy like C.J. Abrams, young up and coming shortstop. You look at guys like Robert Hassel over there, Dylan Cruz. Obviously, you have Mackenzie Gore, who's their ace number one pitcher right now. So listen, like I said, the Nationals do have good young talent, but overall, when you look at the construction of that roster, when you look at the fact that this was a team that was so bad this year that they had to fire both their general manager in Mike Rizzo and their manager in Davey Martinez during the season. And this was the second time that the Mets had lost series to the Nationals, because obviously they've played 4 series this year. The first one, I believe, back in April in Washington, they split that two apiece, which really a series that the Mets should have won, probably even swept that series. They had 2 blown leads late in those games. They swept the one back in Citi Field in, I believe, May, just before they went on that really bad stretch of losing games in late to mid-May. Then there was one in August. They lost 2 out of 3, which I unfortunately was at. And then this one. And the reason why this one was so bad, right? It's because, and we brought this up before, both me and Evan on past podcasts before, and even, when we've done our post-game streams, right? The reason why this series loss was so bad in particular is because the Mets are at a point right now, or at least they were at a point. I mean, technically they still are, because they still could make the playoffs, even though I don't think they have a good shot at making the playoffs. And really looking at it, they don't deserve to make the playoffs. But like I said, the Mets are at a point going to this National Series, especially when you just came off a huge series win against the San Diego Padres, where you took 2 out of 3. Like I said, they were in a position where every single game mattered. And into those 3 games, they looked as unprepared as I've ever seen this team look unprepared. I mean, the defense, terrible. Pitching, not great. I mean, a couple guys pitched well, but really, I mean, for the most part, the pitching wasn't great, especially Sunday's game, which we'll get to. And again, that was another Carlos Mendoza disaster class in terms of how he aligned both Clay Holmes and Sean Manaea to pitch that game. But like I said, the defense was not great. And then you look at the offense. Sure, they scored 12 runs in that first game, but it's like me and Evan always say. Sure, you score 12 runs in the game. I really can't get excited, though, because we've seen, and this is a trend with this team, and it's been a trend over the last 4 years, and it's really been a trend with this year's team. We've seen them have games, or we see them have the occasional short stretch where they're capable of putting up, 5, 6, 7, 8, even double-digit runs. However, they are not able to sustain it over a long period of time. And like we've stated before, we're not expecting this team, even though yes, they're one of the highest paid offenses in the league, and they should have a very high ceiling in terms of how they approach and attack certain pitchers and how ultimately they put up runs, right? But again, I'm not asking this offense to put up double digit runs a night. I'm not asking them to put up 9 runs a night. I'm asking them to be one of the most consistent dynamic offenses in which they put up 5, 6, 7 runs a night. And then you ultimately let your pitching get you through the rest of the game. But there's been multiple long stretches this year, and we even seen it through the start of the year where yes, they were at a point this year, especially before that mid-May, late May collapse, where they got swept back-to-back series by the Rays and the Braves in Atlanta. They were winning games, but they were winning these low-scoring games where the pitching really carried them. I mean, both starting wise and both bullpen wise, those two areas those two departments of this team was carrying this team and won them a lot of games because and we even stated this before, like, sure, it's cool that you're winning all these close games, but in the long run it's not sustainable once you get into crunch time, and especially once you get into the playoffs, because when you get into the playoffs, you're going to be facing teams with very good lineups. You're going to be facing teams with very good starting rotations and very good bullpens. And the fact that, and like I said, I wanted to give the offense a little bit of time. I wanted them to figure it out. And I believe before the season, like, you add Juan Soto, you bring back Pete Alonso, you add in a couple other pieces. Obviously, you bring back Jesse Winker. And obviously, you still have your guys like Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo, Francisco Alvarez, who you were hoping was coming off, or you were hoping he was going to rebound off a poor season and off a really poor postseason last year. Apart from the last 2 games in Game 5 and Game 6 of the NLCS, you had a guy in Mark Vientos who had just an amazing breakout year last year. And you look at all the pieces they assembled, and I know we talk about Eric Chavez and Jeremy Barnes. And listen, those two are terrible hitting coaches. Like, don't get me wrong. But to me, I thought that if the Mets add just enough offensive talent, especially with adding a guy like Juan Soto, who's one of the best bats in all of baseball, I thought, okay, maybe the coaching isn't great, but at least maybe you add enough talent to where the talent by itself could overcome the coaching, or at least the poor coaching. And it hasn't happened. And look, I agree. You still have to hold the players to a certain standard, and you have to hold them accountable for their failures. I 100% agree about that. But this is going to be a big talking point of this upcoming podcast, is for a team that has such a high payroll, for a team that has quote unquote a lot of really good all-stars and a couple of good superstars and some good solid depth players. This is one of the worst coached and fundamental teams in all of baseball. And that's what we saw in this series. And like I said, it goes both ways. It goes through the players and it goes through the coaching staff as well. And like I said, this series fully reflected that of this team, of how poor fundamentally and how poorly coached they are. But anyway, guys, before we get deeper into this episode, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe on the channel. We greatly appreciate your guys' support here on the channel, and we want to keep feeding you guys content. Obviously, there's only 6 more games left in the season, probably the last 6 games, because I don't think they're making the playoffs, and I'm sure a lot of you guys watching don't think they're going to make the playoffs. But look, if you do, fair on you. That's your opinion. You be a fan of how you want to be a fan. I'm not going to judge you. I may disagree with you. I may argue with you and try to debate you, but listen, at the end of the day, we're all going to have our own opinions. And at the end of the day, we're all Met fans, and we all support the New York Mets, even though sometimes they piss us off, like this past series. And also, make sure you guys turn on your post notification bell as well to let you guys know anytime we upload a video or go live on the channel here on Mets Central. But yeah, let's get a little bit deeper, and let's actually, go now and start to break down some of these games. And I'm sure you guys watch the post-game shows. You guys know how we typically do these breakdowns. But yeah, I mean, listen, the first game, right? The first game was such a tease for multiple ways, right? Because obviously you just come off a series where you take 2 out of 3 against the San Diego Padres, and that third game that they won against the Padres was huge because you're like, okay, win this series, and you expect them to at least have a fairly easier series against the Nationals, even though, like we said, this team, one of their worst attributes about them, and this is something that has carried on through the last couple years of this Mets franchise, they play down the competition. And really, it started right from the first game, even though they completely wiped the floor with the Nationals 12-6, because you have Brandon Sproat. And listen, Brandon Sproat, I believe I covered the first game of the series. Yeah, I believe so. Brandon Sproat had a very weird start in this game, right? Because when you look at his line, right, he only goes 4 innings. And let me just pull up his final line really quickly, guys. But yeah, goes 4 innings, 4 hits, 4 runs, 4 earned runs given up, 2 walks, 5 strikeouts. His ERA sits at a 3.94. Like I said, Brandon Sproat is such a weird start, right? Because he starts the first 2 innings, 1, 2, 3 in the first inning, with 2 strikeouts in the first inning on both Wood and CJ Abrams. Then goes down to the second inning and gets Dalen Lyle to strike out, and then gets Garcia and Dylan Cruz to ground out. And you're like, all right. And then let's not forget the Mets in the first inning, they were able to tack on a run courtesy of a Pete Alonso RBI single in which he brought in Francisco Lindor, which the Mets also took advantage of a poor Washington National defensive error. And then we get to the third, right? And this is where all the wheels just came off the bus, right? Because obviously one of the big no-nos for starting pitchers, and we've said this multiple times on this channel, can't walk the leadoff guy. And Brandon Sproat walks the leadoff guy. But you know what? Okay, Sproat's been good. Little mistake there. Don't really, have I have an issue with it, but I'm not too concerned yet because, like I said, he had been really good through the first 2 innings. But then the defensive errors start because Jorge Alfaro puts a ball in play. Sproat tries to field it, throws it towards first base at Pete Alonso, throws it away. That allows Paul DeJong to score, walks Jacob Young, then gets James Wood to ground into a double play. And you're like, okay, you just got a big double play. You're still tied at 1, runner on third, obviously. Make the next pitch, get out of it. So he allows a double to CJ Abrams. Nationals go up 2-1. And then you're like, okay, just make the next pitch. We're only down 2-1. We still believe we are capable of beating this Nationals team. And then Jose Siri. Oh, Jose Siri. What a guy. What a guy. Jose Siri probably had one of the worst defensive outfield games that I've probably ever seen a center fielder play before in my life. And you guys obviously don't know this joke because it's an inside joke between me and Evan, but hashtag Cody was right. Cody was right about Jose Siri because Josh Bell, and granted, it's a hard liner into the left center field gap, right? And listen, I'm not expecting every center fielder to make this play, but for Jose Siri, a guy that was brought over here from the Tampa Bay Rays and was brought over for 2 reasons: his defensive play in center field, and 2, his speed. It's not the bat because we've all seen how poorly Jose Siri has been with the bat in his short tenure of being a New York Met. Well, and this is the part where it really screwed Brandon Sproat because, like I said, sure, it was a line drive in the gap, but I'm sorry. When you look at the replay, Jose Siri gets right under that ball. He needs to catch that ball. There is no excuses. And initially they charged that play an error. And then for some reason they switched it to a double, which ended up screwing over Brandon Sproat because the next 2 runs come over because of that single error. And then the error he commits right after that. So, like I said, that completely just ruined Brandon Sproat's night. And not only it ruined his final line because he doesn't deserve the 4 earned runs against him, but it also ruined his night because really he should have been out of that inning on that pitch. And then, if he does get out of that inning, maybe he goes, well, I'm pretty sure he goes the 5th inning, and maybe he even goes to complete 6th inning. If not, he at least pitches into the 6th inning. But once again, the Mets defense screws the team. Because like I said, Siri should be making that play. I'm sorry. He was right onto that ball. If anyone disagrees, I mean, listen, like I said before, you're entitled to your own opinion. I simply don't agree. For a guy like Jose Siri, and especially for a guy, right, that has been Let me just gather my thoughts. For a guy in Jose Siri who has missed a ton of time this year because of his injury back in April when he sustained that bad injury in Sacramento. Like I said, for a guy that has missed such a long period of time, and for a guy that was probably chomping at the bit to get back into this lineup and to get back into this team, the fact that he's had this many mistakes in center field, that just tells me that I'm sorry, you can't rely on Jose Siri at all because I'm sorry. And like I said before, the Mets are in a spot where every single game matters. You have to win as many games as possible. I'm sorry, I cannot be playing a guy out there, especially such a pivotal defensive position in center field. I can't be playing a guy that's not fully focused. I can't. And then Dalen Lyle ends up hitting a ball into the right center field gap, and Jose Siri probably takes one of the worst routes to a ball in the outfield that I've ever seen. That ball gets past him. Josh Bell scores. Dalen Lyle ends up at third base with the triple. And look, thankfully Brandon Sproat was able to get out of that inning, right? Because he gets Luis Garcia to ground out. But as a center fielder, how are you making those two poor plays? And again, it just goes back to one, lack of focus by the players, and two, lack of just coaching and lack of from Mendoza, especially to get these guys going. Like I said, you're in a spot of the season where you have to win games. And the fact that, the team's coming out this flat, especially against a team like this, I'm sorry, that is just not a good look for A, the players, and for B, Carlos Mendoza. And look, we'll get into Carlos Mendoza more as we dive deeper into this podcast. But I'm sorry, and you guys know me and Evan's opinion on Carlos Mendoza. I mean, I clearly stated that when we broke down when we did the post game show for the finale of the series on Sunday. But I'm done with Carlos Mendoza. I can't. Like I said, we're gonna get more into that as we get deeper into the podcast. But Mendoza he doesn't look like the guy at all. Just so many mistakes. And again, it's not only the mistakes, but it's the incapability of learning from your mistakes. And the fact that he keeps on repeating the same mistakes. That is the one killer with Mendoza. And also the fact that he also always overmanages. Like I just don't understand it. I don't understand it. But yeah, and then so they're down 4-1 after that, right? And they get a run back in the bottom of the third, courtesy of a Pete Alonso RBI single. Sproat then rebounds, obviously top of the fourth. And then we go into the bottom of the fourth, and the Mets show life, which is something that we haven't been able to say a ton here, especially throughout the season. But, Nimmo, Marte lead it off with back-to-back singles. Francisco Alvarez with a really nice hit, drives a double down the left field line to tie it up at 4. Brett Beatty gets hit by a pitch. Jose Siri naturally strikes out. Oh, and even before that, just before we continue on, but after Jose Siri made those two defensive errors in center field, how Carlos Mendoza didn't pull him and sat his ass on the bench is beyond me, and I am completely infuriated by that. Because, like I said, if you're not going to show focus in these games, like I said, you cannot be in these games. And again, the fact that Mendoza did not sit him, that's a complete embarrassment right there. And that just shows that Mendoza is not a qualified leader and not a qualified manager in these tough spots where you have to make these tough decisions. Because then even then, when we get to the bottom of the third, Jose Siri came out to a bat. And this guy was so unprepared that he got a pitch clock violation before the count even started. So right away, he was down 1-0. If you're not going to pull him after that, I'm sorry. And again, that's just another example that I just don't have any faith in Carlos Mendoza. How Jose Siri stayed in that game is beyond me completely. But like I said, back to the fourth inning. After they tie it up, Lindor hits a single, makes it 5-4. Juan Soto then with just a huge 3-run shot, his first 3-run home run of the season, puts the Mets up 8-4. And after that, you figure, because obviously they don't score any more runs in that inning, you figure clear sailing. The Mets are gonna have an easy win in this game, but unfortunately, it's really never like that with this team because top of the fifth, Brosman comes in, which is just another wild decision that Mendoza made. Like for me, at that time when Brandon Sproat came out of this game, he was at 71 pitches. I know that he had the long third inning because of the two errors made by Jose Siri, or at least the two that should have been errors by Jose Siri because they weren't rule errors. But I'm sorry, for me, I would have pushed Brandon Stroh in that fifth inning. There was no reason for Brosman to be in that inning, and then it follows it up because gives up a leadoff single to Jacob Young, gets James Wood to strikeout, but then gives up a 2-run shot to C.J. Abrams, and the lead all of a sudden is cut down to 8-6. And then Mendoza brings in Brooks Raley after three batters, which Raley should have been at the start of that inning. And if you were going to bring in a reliever to start that inning, Raley for me should have been the guy. But like I said, I would have let Sproat at least start that inning. But thankfully, Raley comes in, gets the next two out, and then again, fifth inning, nothing going there. Top of the sixth, Raley gets the first out. Stanek gets the next two out. Again, bottom of the sixth, Mets can't score any runs. Top of the seventh, Helsley surprisingly with a very good 1-2-3 inning. More on Helsley later in this podcast. And then we get to the bottom of the seventh, a good manufactured run there by the Mets. They go up 9-6. Top of the eighth, Tyler Rogers comes in. Very good shutdown inning from him. Gets a 1-2-3 inning. And then the bottom of the eighth, the Mets, some good offense here. They were able to tack it. They were able to tack on a couple runs here to extend the lead to 12-6. And the good thing about the fact that the offense was able to tack on three more runs in that eighth inning was because at that point you didn't have to use Edwin Diaz in that game, and the Mets were able to go to Chris Davinsky to allow him to close out that game. And to me, I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, cool. You close out this game. You don't use Edwin Diaz. You have him saved for tomorrow. If you have to use him in a big spot or maybe even two spots, you have him saved. But unfortunately, like we'll get into with the second game, because Carlos Mendoza is such a great tactician, such a great manager, he royally fucked that up. But like I said, we'll get into more of that. But like I said, they win that first game 12-6. Confidence gets a little bit higher. Score 12 runs. Like I said, you like to see that from the offense. But like I said, can't get too excited because we've seen this offense have these big games and then they falter. And then naturally, what happens in the second game? The Mets, for the first 7 innings of this game, was completely cold. They were just completely dominated by Cade Cavalli, who, look, Cade Cavalli is a nice young pitcher, but I'm sorry, for an offense that is paid this much, you should not be getting outdueled and outmatched by Cade Cavalli. Because like I said, for the first 7 innings, the Nationals completely shut down this Mets lineup. And then the defense, because listen, Nolan McLean started this game for the Mets, right? And listen, McLean didn't have his sharpest stuff, but naturally, and this is a good attribute that we've seen out of Nolan McLean so far through his short major league career, even when he doesn't have his best stuff, he is still able to get through these games. And like I said, has a little bit of a rough first inning, allows a couple base runners, allows James Wood to score due to a Dalen Lyle ground out. So the Nationals taking a really 1-0 lead. But like I said, just like the first game where they went down, you're like, okay, they're down, but I at least think they're capable of staging a comeback like they did last night. Bottom first, nothing. Top of the second, Dylan Cruz singles. And then this is where the terrible defensive errors start once again for the Mets, because Riley Adams lines a single into right field. And listen, I love Juan Soto. He's been very good at the plate this year, and he's even been respectable defensively. But you cannot have this error at this point of the game, because like I said, you have Dylan Cruz is on first base. Riley Adams hits a hard line drive to him, and Juan Soto tries to play it on the hop, and the ball gets right by him. It goes all the way back to the right field wall. Dylan Cruz comes around to score, and Riley Adams is standing on third base with the single, but with an error to allow him to move up to 3 bases. And right away, you're down 2-0, and you have a runner on third with no outs. And then there'll be another error because Pete Alonso naturally, makes all the tough plays first base, makes these tough scoops, makes these tough diving plays, but then when he fields a ground ball naturally and he has to make the throw over to first base, he of course fucks it up as usual. So the Nationals get another base runner due to a fielding error by Pete Alonso. James Wood strikes out, and then there will be a wild pitch, which Francisco Alvarez probably should have done a better job at blocking. That allows the third run of the game to come around, and then C.J. Abrams grounds out to get out of that inning. But then, like we said, okay, Mets are down. They're at least capable of coming back, but this offense, just non-existent. They get shut down the bottom of the second. Top of the third, McLean with a nice bounce back inning. We then move on to the bottom of the third, where again the Mets are unable to come across with a couple runs, and they had guys in scoring position. They had Lindor, or at least they had Lindor in scoring position because he led off with a single. Juan Soto reached on catcher's interference, and then Pete Alonso and Brandon Nimmo both could not advance them as they both get out of this inning. Top of the fourth, apart from a Brady House single, McLean manages to get through that inning relatively well. Bottom of the fourth, again, the Mets go down in order. Top of the fifth, again, good inning there by McLean. So after those first two innings where the defense didn't help him out, he really settled down and really gave this team a chance to win. Again, bottom five, Mets come up again. They are unable to score after Brett Baty and Juan Soto singles. Then top of the sixth, Brosman comes in. He gets a 1-2-3 inning, so a nice bounce back from him after his terrible outing on the Friday game. We then move on to the bottom of the sixth, and then the Nationals start to bring in their bullpen. And again, the Nationals have one of the worst bullpens in all of baseball. And yes, I know that the Mets were able to hit that bullpen in the first game, but like I said, if you are not unable to build off of that and you are unable to carry that over in the second game, I don't want to hear how well you hit that bullpen, because again, this is an offense, which I'll say again, one of the highest paid offenses in the league. You have three quote unquote superstars in Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, and Pete Alonso, and you really have a solid player in Brandon Nimmo. And the fact that this offense just got shut down time after time in this game, it's just it is such a bad look. It's like again, where is the intensity? Where is the readiness to come out and play? Especially like I said, when you need to win these games, the Cincinnati Reds are right on your back. And then top of the seventh, Brosman gets the first two outs. Credit to Richard Lovelady who gets James Wood the ground out. Bottom of the seventh, Mets again unable to get anything going, and then the top of the eighth. Dickie Lovelady does a really good job, and he gets you that inning. We then move on to the bottom of the eighth, and this is where the Mets started to actually put together a rally, which is like, holy shit, they did it. They are capable of doing it. And again, this is why I'm so frustrated with this team a lot of times. It's because they have shown multiple times that they are capable of doing it. It's just the consistency. They lack consistency and the willpower to do it time after time after time again. But bottom of the eighth, Juan Soto leads off that inning, and Jose Ferrer comes in. So Juan Soto strikes out. Pete Alonso gets hit by pitch. Brandon Nimmo hits into a force out. Starling Marte then doubles. So you have second and third, 2 outs. And then I'll give Mendy credit where credit is due, because Jose Ferrer had really good splits against lefties, but he was terrible against righties. And so naturally, Mendy did actually make the smart move. Like I said, I'll give him credit where credit is due. And he puts in Mark Vientos to pinch hit for Jeff McNeil. And naturally, McNeil hits a double down the left field line to bring in 2 runs. So the Mets cut it to 3-2. There then was a pinch runner, which I don't agree with pinch running Luisano Acuna here, because for me, if you're going to bring in Acuna, I at least want him to come in when you either where there's a situation where you're on first base and you need to pinch run to try to steal a base, or in a situation which the Mets got into this game later where you're in extra innings and you really need that speed. That's where I would have used Luisano Acuna, but Mendoza decides to substitute him here to pinch run for Vientos. It didn't work out as Francisco Alvarez would strike at the end of the inning. And then we move on to the top of the ninth. And again, another decision for me here, which I don't know, it worked, but again, I don't agree with going to Ryan Helsley here, because for me, I understood that Ryan Helsley had the good bounce back outing in the first game of the series, but for me, like I said, you're in a spot where everything is so tight and you need to win your games. For me, there was 2 options. You would either go to Edwin Diaz to go out with your best guy, or go to Tyler Rogers, because just in case, in the situation, if this game goes to extra innings, like me and Emma have stated before, I am not comfortable with using Tyler Rogers in a situation where in extra innings where there's already gone second base, because we know that Tyler Rogers this year, when he is coming out of the bullpen with runners already on base, because he is a soft contact type of pitcher, just in case if there's a little bloop into the outfield, or even, a little dribble in the infield, or even, a ball just gets past one of the infielders, runs are going to come around to score. So for me, I would have rather used Tyler Rogers in this spot where again you have no one on base, and even in yesterday's or even in the first game of the series, Tyler Rogers came in, clean inning, quick 1-2-3 inning. It was even the same in the finale of the San Diego Padres series, where I believe Rogers came in the it was either the seventh inning because Gregory Soto came in the eighth inning. Tyler Rogers comes in the seventh inning, and again, quick 1-2-3. I believe he only threw 6 pitches or 7 pitches in that Padres outing, and then even in this one against the Nationals in the first game of the series, he only threw 6 to 7 pitches. So, and for me, it's like again, this is a lack of Mendoza knowing his players and knowing the situations to put his best players in. Like I said, for me, I would have gone to Edwin Diaz just because you're in a spot where you're at this point of the season, like I said, where you have to win games. I would have gone down with my best pitcher right there. So, and obviously he went to, or like I said, I either would have went to Rogers. I definitely wouldn't have went to Helsley though. But credit to Helsley because apart from a Dylan Cruz leadoff walk, he gets the next 3 guys out in order, and then the bottom of the ninth. And this was one of the 2 areas where the Mets lost this game for themselves because, and again, another good pinch hitting decision by Mendoza. See, I give him credit where credit's due. The problem is with Mendoza, he just doesn't make a lot of good decisions because, like I said, Ferrer has very good splits against lefties, but very poor splits against righties. And so Mendoza pinch hits Torrens for Brett Baty. Torrens hits a single to get the inning going. He then Siri then comes into pinch run for Torrens. Cedric Mullins lays down a sacrifice bunt, so Siri was able to move on to second base. Mullins sacrifices himself, so that's 1 out. Lindor's then hit by the pitch. Juan Soto then hits a single, and it was a good piece of hitting by Juan Soto because he gets jammed on the inside part of the play and just gets enough on the ball where he's able to just muscle the ball to center field. So, and a very good read by Jose Siri there. So he's able to come around the score. Mets tied up at 3-3, and then the Mets execute such a good double steal as Lindor's able to steal third base and Soto's able to steal second base. And all you need at this point, and then I'm sorry, all you need at this point is a deep fly ball into the outfield to win you this ball game, and you win a very crucial series. So Ferrer intentionally walks Pete Alonso, fine. Brandon Nimmo comes up and has such a weak at bat, goes down on 4 pitches, takes ball 1, takes strike 2 in the zone, fouls off an inside pitch, and then chases a slider out of the zone. And then now you need a base hit to win you this ball game. And naturally, Starling Marte is unable to come through. So we head to the top of the 10th. Mets make a couple defensive substitutions, and Edwin Diaz comes into this game. And let me tell you, Edwin Diaz was excellent. Excellent. He gets Nelson Nunez out, gets James with the ground out, and then gets CJ Abrams to strike out. And you're at a point where it's like, okay, you have a runner on second base. Just sacrifice bunt, and then all you need is a sacrifice fly, and you win this ball game again. Same sort of situation we saw in the bottom of the 9th. And probably one of the most infuriating innings I've seen this Mets team put together. Because you have the Nationals make a pitching change. You have Lau comes in for Ferreira, or for Ferrer. Starling Marte is the ghost runner at second base because he struck out to end the last inning. Luis Acuna attempts to lay down a bunt, lays down the bunt successfully, but unfortunately, it was a weird bunt where Marte couldn't get a good read on it. So he stays at second base, but thankfully, Acuna was able to make it to first base. So you have first and second, no outs. You are in the same spot as you were just before Acuna came up. Francisco Alvarez comes up with the chance to win this ball game. And look, I'm sorry. I know a lot of people in this situation want to see Alvarez, try to drive in the winning run. But I'm sorry, for me, in this game was such a tight game. You have to play small ball in this situation. And listen, I get that maybe people will argue that Francisco Alvarez is not the best bunter. Maybe he doesn't even know how to bunt in the first place. You know what? I do not care. I do not care. You need to do what's for the best of the team. And for me, you cannot allow Francisco Alvarez to hit and even because this is the most frustrating thing, right? And even Evan brought up, and I brought this up in our group chat, right? Like, the Mets allow Juan Soto and Lindor to bunt in certain situations, and this is situations where it's early in the game, so it's not like you even have to bunt. And I don't even like those guys bunting in particular because I believe those two guys, they have such good bats where why would you even waste an out, especially for a guy like Juan Soto, which I know he's stolen a lot of bases this year, but Juan Soto is not a particularly fast runner. Lindor, on the other hand, yes, okay, at least he can, try to bunt on for a base single or for a base hit because he has at least more speed than Juan Soto, right? But like whenever I see these certain spots where Juan Soto bunts, it's like, why? Why? Juan? Just you have such a good bat, you have such a good eye for the plate. Try to just get on base with a walk. But I mean, it's just like, and then like I said, going back to Alvarez at bat, like I'm sorry for me, and I brought up the point where it's like, okay, maybe Alvarez doesn't know how to bunt. I'm sorry. I believe that every player, unless you're a superstar player like Lindor or Soto or even Pete Alonso, I believe every single depth player should learn how to bunt because you never know the situation you are going to come up in. And for that is a time and place, an excellent time and place to lay down and bunt, sacrifice yourself, and get the two runners over to second, third. Because if Alvarez executes that bunt, executes the sacrifice bunt, and he's able to move over Marte to the third base and Acuna to second base, you now have two shots, just like the bottom of the ninth, to bring in the winning run, and all you need is a deep sacrifice slide to the outfield. But naturally, what happened? I even said this because I was listening to the game at work on the radio on my phone. I said when I at least heard that Alvarez wasn't trying to bunt on the first pitch, I'm like, okay, fine. They're gonna let him hit, fine. If he hits into a double play right here, I'm going to be pissed off. And in the back of my mind, I had such a bad feeling he was going to hit into a double play because I'm like, this would happen. This would happen in this situation. And what happens? Alvarez grounds into a double play. Marte moves over to third base, but now you need a base hit to win the ball game. And again, this just goes back to the lack of managerial awareness by Carlos Mendoza. Because I'm sorry, Carlos. Last time I checked, you are the manager of this team. You are the coach of this team. You have power over your players. So don't tell me that you can't go to Francisco Alvarez and tell him to, or at least signal to him to lay down a sacrifice bunt. Because if you're not going to do that, then I'm sorry. You are not capable and you are not good enough to be a major league manager at this level. Because there's a time and space. Because if you again, and the reason why the bunt was such a good idea in that spot is because one, you minimize the risk of a double play, and two, you increase your odds of winning your ball. You increase your odds of winning this ball game. And like I said, hits into a double play, and then Ronnie Mauricio comes up and lines out. And right when the Mets did not score in that inning, I'm like, they lost this ball game. And then naturally, what did I say before? Don't bring in Tyler Rogers in the spot where there's runners on bases already. And Tyler Rogers comes in. And this was the other frustrating part too, was like in this inning, the Nationals were giving you this game because Andres Chaparro hits a ground ball to Ronnie Mauricio at third base. And CJ Abrams makes such a boneheaded decision to try to take off for third base. Listen, anyone that plays baseball knows if you're on second base and the ball's hit to the left side of the infield, you don't take off. You have to stay put. And Abrams, dumb read, gets tagged out. And you're like, okay, cool. You now got rid of that runner in scoring position, especially for a guy like Abrams who has speed and has wheels and and pretty much a ball, pretty much a ball to the outfield, scores them automatically. You're like, okay, one out, and you have a guy on first base. You could easily get through this inning. And then Galen Lyle comes in, hits a deep fly ball to center field. Mullins reads it just terribly, is unable to get to it, and then both Nimmo and Juan Soto just make terrible decisions to not back up Cedric Mullins. The ball ends up bobbling around, and Galen Lyle with the speed allows not only Chaparro to come around to score, but Lyle also comes around to score. It's an inside the park home run. Sorry, guys. Nationals go 5-3, and then okay, cool. They get the next two outs, but 5-3, and like I said, you knew the Mets lost this ball game, and then Mullins comes up, pop out, Lindor comes out, line out, and then Juan Soto comes up, strike out, and ends that ball game. And right away, series is tied at 1, which for me it was a bad loss, right? But for me, at least before the series started, I said that I would like them to sweep them. but at least win the series. Take 2 out of 3. And I can't lie, and even I talked about this on the post game show that we did on Sunday after Sunday's disastrous game, because we know the tendencies of this ball club. We know that typically after devastating losses, the Mets tend to follow it up with even more losses because they are unable to recover well after those bad losses. And like I said, going to Sunday's game, I didn't have a good feeling. I didn't have a good feeling. And even this game was fucked up even before this first game even started, because after Saturday's game, or maybe it was even after Friday's game, we got the news because naturally they were going to do the Clay Holmes and Sean Manaea piggyback, which we saw in the first game of the Padres series, and then the first time we saw it during the season was the final game before the All-Star break in Kansas City, where the Mets lost that game. But it wasn't either Manaea or Clay Holmes' fault. It was just the offense didn't show up, which, again, shocker. But in those two instances, and again, those two times where they did the piggybacking with those two pitchers, they started with Clay Holmes, and Sean Manaea came out of the bullpen. So tell me why. And again, I will repeat this. I get that maybe people are sick and tired of me saying this. When you're in a spot where you need to win ball games, especially dropping the game the night before, why are you fucking around and switching the order? Have you guys ever heard of the saying, "Don't fix what ain't broke"? So tell me, why does Carlos Mendoza feel the need that he needs to switch around the order and go Sean Manaea to start and then Clay Holmes out of the bullpen? Because I didn't feel good about the decision. And listen, I get that maybe people say because if the Mets made the playoffs that Clay Holmes would have came out of the bullpen, which I agree, and maybe people would have said that you at least want to get Clay Holmes comfortable in the role. And listen, I could at least agree with that if the Mets already had a playoff position locked up. The Mets at this point don't have a playoff position locked up, and again, you need to win games. So why are you messing around and why are you tinkering? This is just another case of Carlos Mendoza overmanaging. And again, not knowing the best situation to put his players and not knowing his players. Because right away, it's like listen, cool. If the Mets already had a playoff spot locked up and they wanted to do this just to switch it around and experiment, cool. I don't have a problem with that. But like I said, why are you experimenting when you need to win ball games? Doesn't make any sense. And then this Sunday game, infuriated me just 100% because, again, Sean Manaea actually starts off this game well, gives up a single to James Wood, then gets a double play by Dylan Cruz, and then gets Josh Bell to strike out. The Mets in the first inning, apart from a Juan Soto walk, gets picked off at first base. They're not able to get anything. Then we get to the top of the second inning. Dalen Lyle leads off that inning with a single. DeYoung flies out. Jorge Alfaro hits a double to put the Nationals up 1-0. And then Brady House grounds out. So cool. You're 2 outs. All you need is one more out to get out of that inning. And then Naci Nunez comes into the plate, and Sean Manaea just makes a bad pitch, and he hits a 2-run shot into the left field, over the left field wall. And right away, the Mets are down 3-0 early in this game. And right away, I'm like, yeah, they're not winning this game, especially with how poorly the offense played in the last game and then this game. I'm like, yeah, they have no shot. Again, bottom of the second, nothing. Top of the third, Manaea, good 1-2-3 inning. Then the bottom of the third, Luis Torrens hits a double. And then again, just another play where the Mets lack basic fundamentals. Because you have Luis Torrens on second base. Cedric Mullins ends up hitting the wall at the left field. Dalen Lyle, initially he makes the catch, but ends up hitting with the wall. The ball comes out of his glove. He's laying there on the ground hurt. Torrens does the right thing. He comes around to score to cut the lead down to 3-1. But Cedric Mullins, for some reason, rounds first base and is just standing there like an idiot, amused. And he's like, dude, take off, go to second, go to third base, take advantage of the fact that Lyle's hurt. Listen, I get that you're concerned that the guy's hurt, but again, you're playing competitive baseball. Take the extra bases when you can. And he got even lucky that he was able, that he was even able to stay on first base. Because really, after the Nationals got on the ball, they tagged him out on the base pass, but there was confusion, and the umpires let him go out to first base. So again, it's just poor fundamentals. And Cedric Mullins, he's just been terrible ever since coming over here from the Baltimore Orioles. But then even then, after that play, right? let's say Cedric Mullins was at second base or even on third base, right? Because the very next batter, Francisco Lindor, rips almost a double down the right field line. Josh Bell makes a fantastic play, catches it on the fly, tags out Cedric Mullins, and quickly the Mets go from having momentum in the inning to absolutely all their momentum is zapped because of the double play. And you're like, and I know people say, oh, like you don't know if Lindor was technically going to come through in that at bat because if Mullins is either on second and third, maybe what's his name? I believe it was Irvin at that point, Jake Irvin. Maybe Irvin doesn't put that pitch in that exact same spot. Maybe Josh Bell is positioned differently, so you don't know how it's going to work out. And listen, that is true, but I'm just going off what happened. Again, it's frustrating with the little things, how those things come out to bite the team in the ass. And then Juan Soto after that, after the double play, lines a double down the right field line. And then there was a balk with Nimmo at the plate. Soto was at the third base, and then Nimmo was unable to drive in. And then again, top of the fourth, Pete just another terrible error. Robert Hassel hits a ground ball right to him. He's unable to field it cleanly. He gets on first base. Clay Holmes comes in, and credit to Clay Holmes. He actually pitched very well for the rest of this game. Gets the next couple of guys out. Again, bottom of the fourth, nothing going for the Mets. Top of the fifth, another good inning by Clay Holmes. Bottom of the fifth, Mets go down in order 1, 2, 3 again. Again, a trend that the Mets bats just, going down weekly. Again, another good inning there by Clay Holmes, other than a Josh Bell double. He gets the next 3 to get out. And then a little bit of life because Francisco Lindor ends up hitting a solo shot into the right field corner to cut the lead down to 3-2. And you're like, okay, maybe the Mets have some life. Juan Soto then walks. Nimmo hits into a force out. Pete Alonso singles. The Nationals then make a pitching change. Mitchell Parker comes in. And the other thing is so frustrating about this game, right? Did you guys know that Mitchell Parker and Jake Irvin, in terms of qualified pitchers, they have the 2 worst ERAs in terms of all starting pitchers in baseball? And the Mets were able to get 2 runs off of them. 2 in a game where they needed to win. Again, that just shows you how unprepared and how unserious that this team was coming into this last game and to the series in general. But the Mets unable to get any offense in that inning. Mark Vientos then he gets thrown out because he disagrees with a check swing call. He ends up slamming his bat on the ground, and like I said, gets thrown out. Cannot happen there in that situation. I know tensions are tough, and I know Vientos is an emotional guy, but he has to have a more calmer head in that spot. You can't get thrown out there. Then again, we move on to the top of the seventh. Clay Holmes gets 2 outs, allows a single to Naci Nunez. Raley comes in, gets the final out due to a James Wood strikeout. Bottom of the seventh, Brett Beatty hits, Brett Beatty lines out. Luis Torrens strikes out. Mullins singles, but the Mets again they're not able to score in that inning. Top of the eighth, Gregory Soto comes in to replace Brooks Raley. He's able to get to that inning. Bottom of the eighth, again, Mets could not get anything going. Top of the ninth, Edwin Diaz, which and this was another thing, right, too, because if you guys recall back to the second game, after Edwin Diaz went out there to pitch the bottom of the 10th, right, and he only threw 7 pitches in the bottom of the 7th. Why the hell was he not brought out to bring? Why the hell was he not pitching the bottom of the 11th? The guy's making $102 million. He's your best reliever. He's one of the top end relievers and closers in all of baseball. Why in this spot of the season, again, where you need wins, why are you babying him? Why are you babying him? It makes no sense. And like I said, they brought in Tyler Rogers. It misfired. And then Carlos Mendoza after the game comes out and he says that, Edwin Diaz, he was only scheduled to throw one inning in this game. Why? So you could save him on Sunday? Well, great that you saved him on Sunday because, okay, you use him in the top of the ninth. He gets a 1-3 inning. Bro, buddy, Mendy, you lost the ball game. Like, and again, this just goes against everything that Carlos Mendoza has said this year, because there's multiple times this year where he said whenever he's managing these games, he's managing to win the game that they are currently in. So why am I seeing multiple times this year where that statement is not being backed up? Because Mendoza has been a hypocrite multiple times this season. Like, there's times where it's like the game's close and then he waves the white flag by bringing in guys like Ryan Stanek. And then some guys, that's been called up from AAA. It's like what you're telling me and then how you're acting is 2 completely different things. And again, it's one of my main issues with Mendy and why I think that he just simply can't be back next year. But like I said, Diaz comes in and then bottom of the ninth, and Alvarez leads off that inning, hits a deep fly ball into left center field, and Jacob Young, who made a fantastic play earlier to catch a Brett Baty line out to center field, he robs Alvarez of a home run to tie the game at 3-3. And listen, I can't get mad at Jacob Young because the Mets put themselves in the spot, and Jacob Young just made a fantastic play. So caps off to Jacob Young, just fantastic play, or fantastic two plays that he made in center field. And then Brett Baty flies out, Luis Torrens lines out, and there's your ball game. And like I said, the Mets wrap up just a disastrous series against the Washington Nationals. And now, because the Cub playoff spot and 2, they no longer hold their destiny because those Cincinnati Reds swept the Chicago Cubs 4 straight in Cincinnati. So, and they have the same record, but the Reds currently hold the tiebreaker over them because they took the series 4-2. And listen, I can't get mad over the Reds, and I can't get over the Cubs for getting swept because, like I said, if the Mets were just competent this year, they would not be in the spot. So, like I said, it's their fault. It's their fault they're even in the spot in the first place. And look, now they hit the Chicago for a 3-game set. And listen, the Cubs just got swept, like I said. So I'm sure they're looking to get some retribution, and I'm sure they want to take out all their frustrations on the Mets. And then the Mets end up finishing this season in Miami. And we know that's another team that the Mets play down the competition because why beat the Miami Marlins? Why beat a team that you should? So, listen, I'm going to be honest, guys. I know there's a shot for them to still make the playoffs. I don't see them making the playoffs. That, and they don't deserve to make the playoffs. I'm sorry. When you blow when you're up 21 games over 500 and you blow that lead, and then you blow this huge lead you had over the wild card teams, you don't deserve to make the playoffs. So, I mean, look, realistically, tonight in this series, you got Peterson against Cade Horton, against Cade Horton. The second game of the series, you have Jonah Tong against Matthew Boyd, and then the final game, you have Nolan McLean versus Shota Imanaga. Look, I'm not gonna lie. Like I said, I expect them over these last 6 games. I expect them to go 2-4. They probably win a game in both the Cubs and Marlins series, but like I said, they'll probably end up just dropping those 2 series, and then that will be that. They'll miss the playoffs, and then after that, a lot of big decisions need to be made in the offseason. But like I said, we'll get into more of that in offseason talk because our first post-game, our first offseason podcast could be next Monday next Monday or next Tuesday whenever we decide to do it. So. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, before we get out of here, just going to go through your guys' comments. Pablo Mendoza either sits on his hands and watches shit at the fan or presses every button he can. It's wild. He deserved a shot after last year. His time is up. Absolutely. And I said this before a couple podcasts ago. I'm like, with Mendoza, yes, he earned. And like I said, for me, with coaches and even players, I like to give both them at least a decent sample size to show you have. But I'm also a believer in the fact that you also have to earn your time as well. And listen, Mendoza earned the second year because I believe that he was good in his rookie year managing. But I'm sorry, he does not deserve another year after this because this year has just been a all and out disaster. So for me, he can't come back. Apollo, again, if this management doesn't get kicked this offseason, playoffs or not, it'll be a huge issue. Really have nothing to lose. Yeah, absolutely. Like for me, Stearns, I still trust in David Stearns. I know that maybe people don't agree with that. And I know he had a tough offseason last year with a lot of the moves not working out. And I know he had a tough trade deadline. But I'm sorry, I still believe in David Stearns. I believe that what he showed in Milwaukee, I still believe that's the guy who he is. And I'm still not ready to give up on him because he had a great first year in the first year. It didn't work out in the second year. And listen, he has to take accountability for himself. But you know what? He has to start this by obviously, listen, he has to make some difficult decisions in terms of the roster, in terms of, of what guys to trade and who to bring back from free agency. But I believe that the first step he has to do is get rid of a lot of these coaches. For me, Mendoza has to go. He can't come back. Hefner and Barnes are no, Hefner has to go too, but Chavez and Barnes, they can't come back either. And like I said, if they don't, then we have a huge problem. Mets lower ERA like crazy. I know that they do so bad against crap pitchers, yet sometimes show up against aces. I mean, sometimes, but there's been also a ton of situations where, like, I mean, quote unquote. I mean, take a look at the what was it, the finale against the Reds in Cincinnati. Hunter Green was on the mound, and the Mets got completely shut down by Hunter Green. So there's also times this year where they just don't show up against aces either. This team could finish under 500. Could you imagine what happens if they finish at or under 500? Not good things, I'll tell you that, and definitely not good things. But it is certainly a possibility that that could happen. 0-6 finish behind the Marlins for third in the division. I mean, at this point, it doesn't even matter because if they miss the playoffs like I expect them to, that's enough of disaster for itself for changes to happen. And like I said, Two Cats was going on and Red Bear Foxwood was going on. Glad to see you guys in the comments. And then Two Cats, one more. Phillies Yankees World Series this year. Top half hour over here, guaranteed. Guaranteed. I hope not. I really hope not. But anyway, guys, that's gonna be it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast episode. I know you guys probably missed Evan a little bit, but like I said, he was sick. So hopefully he recovers and hopefully, he's back on here for the next podcast or even the next post game show. I'll probably have to do it tonight. So expect me back on here after the Mets Cubs game. But yeah, I'm gonna get out of here because I'm gonna go at least watch the start of the Rangers Bruins preseason game, and then I'll also have the Mets game on as well. So we'll see what happens. I'm not expecting anything, but yeah, obviously, like I said, post game tonight after the Cubs game, and then yeah, I mean in terms of the post game show, or in terms of the next podcast, we'll see you guys after this series after this series concludes against the Cubs. Peace, guys. Let's go Mets.